I'm Dr. David Satcher. I was born and reared in Anniston, Alabama, and today I live in Jonesboro, Georgia, which is about 20 miles south of Atlanta. We live on Lake Spivey out there. I really recently retired, but I still do work at Morehouse School of Medicine. I still do some teaching at Emory and Georgia State, but I'm technically retired and just really finished a book that probably won't be published for another 6 to 8 months.
Awesome. So I don't need to ask you your occupation here, right?
You can.
What is your occupation even though you retired?
Well, I retired about 2 years ago after working for about 14 years at the Morehouse School of Medicine. After leaving Washington, I was Surgeon General from 1998 to 2002. And then I agreed to come to Morehouse and develop the National Center for Primary Care and served as interim president there for a total of about 2 years. Then developed the Satcher Health Leadership Institute. Now, the Satcher Health Leadership Institute is celebrating its 10th anniversary. We have some major leadership development programs. We've had, I think, about 30 mayors to go through that program. Johnny Early, if you know that name, has been very helpful to us. Former mayor of Tuskegee, is quite a friend of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute. And so that's one of the reasons we've been able to attract so many mayors to the leadership development program.
When I say Hobson City, Alabama, what is your initial thought?
Well, Hobson City, Alabama, for me, first and foremost, is Calhoun County Training School, CCTS. That was our school. I did the 10th through the 12th grade there. I had some unforgettable experiences there. I had great teachers, like Pappy Don and Juanita Gerals and Hall, several. I'll say one thing for the teachers at Calhoun County Training School. They were really committed. I mean, I used to jokingly say they taught us as if their very freedom depended upon it. And then I thought about it and said, well, in a way it did. So when I think of Hobson City, of course, I think of Calhoun County Training School because that was where we went to high school. I went to junior high school through the 9th grade at Thankful Junior High, and then rode a bus for about 20 miles to Calhoun County Training School, where I finished the 10th through the 12th grade. It was a memorable experience. I mean, being in a city that was headed by African Americans. In fact, the mayor's daughter was my classmate. Yeah, and it was quite an experience. Interacting with the mayor and the chief of police. I think people who went to school there saw themselves in power, saw the potential to run a city, which you don't see every day. So it was a great experience, which I will never forget. I think I left Hobson City with a lot of confidence in terms of what I could do and what I could be, not just because it was Hobson City, but because some of the most committed teachers I think I have seen anywhere were there teaching. And I mean, Ms. Gerald, of course, was one I remember because she would, if I got ahead in the class at all, she would give me extra work. Go to the library, Satcher, and write a paper on the Constitution. And I ended up winning a contest based on things I wrote because she sent me there to keep me from disturbing the rest of the class. She is great. I started to say she was, but Ms. Gerald is still alive. The first 9 grades, I was at Thankful, and then we caught the bus to Hobson City because that was the only place they had a high school for students like myself from the country. Cobb was up there in the city, but those of us who lived outside of the city limits, and that's why all of these counties in Alabama, not too far from Anniston, know about Calhoun County Training School because that was where the students rode the bus to go to finish high school. Now, unfortunately, not many students went to college. It was the attitude, I think, was that they was, and I think it made sense. They were supposed to learn a trade, carpentry or something, and then or farming. And nobody needed to teach me anything about farming because my dad was quite a farmer. We lived on a 44-acre farm, and from the time I was knee high, each one of us had a job on that farm. So I knew that. But I have great appreciation for the experience I had at Calhoun County.
Did Calhoun County Training School have an impact on the Hopkins City community?
Well, I think Calhoun County Training School was really important to people who lived in the rural areas outside of Anniston. That was where if we were going to go to high school and graduate, we had to go to Hobson City and to Calhoun County. We saw Cobb as the big competitor. When we played them football, we would be really hyped for that. They won most of the time, but my senior year, we won. So that's still good news. I have that memory to hold on to over the years. But seriously, having a classmate whose father is the mayor of the city says to you, you can be mayor one day. You can do whatever they can do. Many of our kids grow up in environments where they've never seen a black person in that kind of authority. Fortunately, that's changing. But for many years, it was not. It was so unusual to see a black person who was mayor or sheriff or even police. When I was growing up, that's just something you didn't see much of. But in Hobson City, you did, because that's who ran the city, African Americans. So we learned more than just what was written in the book.
Yeah.
We learned what was happening in our lives and around us. I graduated in '59. That's 60 years ago, believe it or not. And I left Anniston and went to Morehouse College, and then left there and went to medical school, Case Western in Cleveland, and graduate school. So I finished medical school and graduate school in 1970. So what I'm saying is there was a long period, and you sort of lose contact. You lose contact with what's going on. But it was hard to imagine Hobson City or Calhoun County Training School not being there or closing. And I'm not one who believes that you have to close down when you become integrated. I think when it's done right, and it requires really good leadership, but from both sides. I mean, it has to be people who have decided that they're going to work together in an integrated fashion. I think Anniston may be going through some of that right now. They have a lot of fights in city council meetings and things, but based on what I'm seeing, they're trying to figure out a way to make this thing work in an integrated fashion. Of course, Hobson City was unusual. It was, I guess, the first and only city in Alabama run by an African American. So obviously, the challenge was there. But I'm not one who believes that if you integrate, it means you're going to close. I don't know all of the details about why Calhoun County Training School integrated, but I know that my younger brothers went to Wellman. They never went to Calhoun County. Integration said that they didn't have to ride that bus 20 miles. They went to now they took a real beating. They had some rough days of students attacking them and things like that in order to get through. Larry, who will be here today, my youngest brother, graduated with honors from Wellman, and that was just beginning to integrate when he was there. I want to say one other thing about Calhoun County Training School. I mentioned Mrs. Gerald, and who was a really committed teacher, committed to making the best of us. Pappy Don, I don't know if you've heard that name, but Pappy Don lived here in Anniston. He coached football, he coached basketball, he coached whatever had to be coached, and he taught chemistry. So I went out for football and didn't make the team. I didn't know at the time Pappy Don didn't want me to make the team because he thought I had potentials to be something in chemistry or medicine. So he was not excited about my being on the football team. Now his son told me that later because he never told me that. But Pappy Don was unusual in his commitment to students. You don't expect a coach to be that interested in a student who's taking an academic track, and being able to see in that student the potential to be something, outside of sports. That was the way it was with Papa Dunn. I'll tell you one story. I can't forget it. He was teaching chemistry. My brother by that time, was a student at Alabama State, majoring in chemistry. And he'd come home, and since we lived on a farm, there was not much to do. So he'd try to teach me what they taught him. So one day when I went to the classroom, Papa Don called me over. Satcher. I said, yeah. He said, I have laryngitis. You're going to have to teach the class. I said, I didn't know what laryngitis was. But then I figured, something's wrong with him. And so it so happened that we were studying balancing equations. And I had studied that. So I went through the class and taught how you go about balancing an equation. He was so impressed until he never forgot that. And I remember when I was trying to get into Morehouse, and they were saying, we never had a graduate from Calhoun County Training School, so we don't know how to deal with you. And Pappy Don spoke to one of the alumni from Morehouse, and he said, if you guys don't take this student, you're out of your mind. I mean, he is the best student I've ever. He even occasionally walks on water. He was an exaggerator, so he really put it to them. So they admitted me, and I don't think they're sorry. But it was Pappy Don, who pushed. But I had also gotten good teaching. So the first week at Morehouse, when we had to all take exams, I actually came out, right up top, compared to other students. I did well. Ended up in a special class of students that first year.
Do you believe that integration caused Hobson City's social and economic decline?
Well, it was probably part of it because we struggled to compete, and sometimes the people we're competing with have a head start on us. They've been supported in a totally different way. Their parents had money. My dad worked in the foundry for 40-some years, and he worked behind the sand machine. He knew more about the sand machine than anybody. Whenever they brought on a new person to drive the sand machine, they'd ask my dad to teach him how to drive the sand machine, and yet he couldn't get the job. And that was true throughout the South, maybe throughout much of the U.S. So that means he probably made about half of what he could have made if he had been able to get the job that he was able to carry out. So we forget about the fact that it's not just now that discrimination hurts us. It goes way back to slavery, way back to all of those years where we were underpaid and undersupported. So it is true that a lot of Black businesses struggle. And so that means that if a city integrates, the people who have the best chance, of course, are the people who have history of funds and support. So it's hard I don't believe that integration itself has to be a cause of deterioration. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a very strong supporter of integration. When I was a student at Morehouse, I went to jail and to prison because we decided that we were going to integrate Atlanta, and we did. I know some people think that because of integration, and when the competition starts, if you don't have a history, if you don't have, funds to get started, you're less likely to be successful. So I would say that's the only way in which I would see integration being a problem in terms of survival. It is if you don't have the resources when you integrate you know who's going to come out on top, the person who has the history and the resources. So we still haven't quite gotten there yet, but I am not one who believes that integration has to mean failure.
Explain some things that needs to take place in order for Hobson City to revitalize its community.
Well, based on everything that I have seen throughout this country, and I have lived for years in Atlanta, Cleveland, Rochester, Los Angeles, where I was the CEO of the Drew Postgraduate Medical School. So having seen all of that, I would say, number one, there has to be an attraction of resources. I mean, I think in a city like Hobson City, you've got to attract businesses, and there've got to be jobs. Sooner or later, there got to be resources to support people in that city, and they're not going to all be black. And that's why I say what I do about integration. Somehow you have to be able to integrate resources if you're going to be able to survive. You've got to be able to provide jobs. And so I believe that Hobson City can survive, but I believe that in time, if it's going to survive, it's going to have to attract businesses. Some of those businesses may be black-owned, they should be, but there also should be some white-owned businesses coming in and providing jobs for people there. I think that's the only way you survive. Now, when I was a student at Morehouse, there's a restaurant, you may have heard of it, called Pasca's. It's the restaurant where Dr. King used to have a lot of his meetings. And we as students, when we would get arrested and come back out of jail, we'd go straight to Pasca's to get some food, because we couldn't eat anywhere else when I was a student. So Pasca's is still alive, it's still doing well, but I would like to see more businesses in Atlanta. Atlanta's probably done better than any city I can think of. Maynard Jackson insisted that 25% of all the businesses at the airport be black-owned. And that's what we need. We need the kind of leadership that insists upon the integration of leadership and resources. Well, I mean, I think one of the best examples of integrated leadership and integrated resources is Booker Washington. Now, I'm not one who agrees with everything that Booker Washington said, but Mark Twain, in his autobiography, writes about Booker T. Washington, and he writes about a night in New York when the weather was terrible. I mean, it was snowing, it was ice, and Booker Washington had a speaking appointment in New York that night. That's the way he raised money. He would go throughout the country and he would say to the audience the importance of Tuskegee and what it was doing for these students. And he gave examples of students who had gone to school there. It was a terrible night, the kind of night where most people stay at home, and yet Booker T. Washington raised over $3 million that night. People came, and they didn't have to pay to get in, but they gave when they heard about Tuskegee and the fact that Tuskegee was doing what it was doing for its students. So again, Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois didn't agree on a lot of things. But W.B. Du Bois didn't build Tuskegee University or anything like that. So I think we needed both of them, and we need both of their philosophy. But I would not take anything away from Booker Washington. Well, I really hope that Hobson City has a future, and I think it does. The population of Hobson City is less than 800 people right now, from what I can understand. So it's got to grow. It's very hard to maintain and run a city with that small number. So the reason I say we really need new businesses coming in, employing new people, people moving in because there are jobs. People generally don't move into cities where there are no jobs. You know, one of the reasons we move is because we're looking for the opportunity to work. So I personally, and I don't know if Mayor McQuarrie would agree with me, but I think she would, think that the issue of new jobs is really critical for the future of Hobson City. You know, when I was going to Hobson City, I was living outside of Anderson. My dad was working at Anderson Foundry. So most of the students who were going to school there their parents might not have been working in Hobson City. They may have been, like in my case, my dad was working at Anniston Foundry. So this whole issue of integration can be looked at in two ways. You can say, well, when we integrated, that was the decline of the city. Well, not if the integration had included integration of businesses and jobs. And there were more jobs available for people than before. But most of the jobs were not in Hobson City. They were in Anniston somewhere. I worked as a student in high school. My first job was Jeff Barbecue, Jeff was well known back in that time. He was known for his sloppy burgers, they call them. But I worked there for 2 years and until I was 16. And then I got a job at the foundry where my father was working, and I worked there until I went to college. And then when I would come back from college, I usually could get a job in the summer at Anniston Foundry. So this whole history of jobs is one that people ought to look at more closely. How do we make sure that there are jobs available for people? Because without them, it's going to be very hard for any community to survive.